ahead. Welcome into episode 196 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Pruitt and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, we're about a month or so removed at this point from the Bruins being eliminated from Stanley Cup playoffs. It's not going to get any easier as the summer goes along, but I do think it's at this point as summer approaches, we're going to start to flip the page to next season. And Scott, you tweeted earlier this week about just the specific dates for the Bruins and the draft and free agency and rookie camps and all that good stuff. But I do think that there's a laundry list of potential questions from listeners based off of last season and going forward that we're going to cover in this mailbag type of episode. So Bridget and Scott, how are you guys doing? And looking forward to, I guess, the rest of the Stanley Cup playoffs, summer. What's new with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I've transitioned into a little bit of a Celtics writer. I've been at their last two games. Game 5 did not go well. Thought, man, I might never see a win at the Garden again. And then Game 7 obviously was awesome to be at. Jason Tatum setting records. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna keep watching the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like, I know for TV ratings, Carolina versus Florida and Dallas versus Vegas probably isn't great. But, I'm interested no matter what. So I'll be watching. And obviously there's the Bruce Cassidy storyline that still, provides a little bit of a Bruins angle, local link there, and, I think you're interested to see how far the Panthers go. They're still rolling. So yeah, I'll be watching, but it doesn't have, I can definitely see this Final Four not having a ton of appeal to kind of the masses.
No, it's kind of crazy because it looked like it was really ramping up to be maybe one of the best playoffs that we've seen in recent history. Like there were a lot of good teams that were coming in with momentum, like the Oilers and the Bruins, the Leafs, teams that have kind of just been knocking at the door. And those teams are all out. So what a turn of events to have an all Southern Final Four going on right now. And yeah, not really one of the most, especially for our market in particular, not a lot of interest in or attention paid to any of those four teams in the Northeast markets here in New York. Yeah, it's probably not ideal for their ratings and their money making, but and even star power kind of lacking with those teams if you really think about it, especially with some guys hurt like Svechnikov. And yeah, just not the most appealing, I guess you could say. Obviously, we're still going to watch. And like Scott mentioned, the whole Bruce Cassidy thing, pretty interesting. Really the only connection left with the Boston sports media market in the playoffs. But today we're going to be recording 2 episodes today. So we have a mailbag because we're going to be doing that once a week. Now that the season's over, get your questions and comments. A lot of people have been leaving comments on our YouTube. So if that's the easiest way for you guys to do it, that's fine. You can also tweet at us and Scott, what's the email? I always forget.
skatepod@weei.com.
Just skatepod, right?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
I
don't know how you could possibly forget that. It's so basic.
Because I always think it's the skate pod. It's not.
That would trip me up too.
But on Twitter @the skate pod.
Yes.
So there is a the on Twitter.
Correct. So we're gonna get to some of the questions that we have had over our last couple of episodes left in our comments and questions that we've been asked. So kind of going to start chronologically here with end of the season stuff, since that feels like we should wrap that up first. So the very first question was it bad game planning for their opponent or not having an answer to the Panthers? Basically, this was a YouTube comment that wanted to get to whether or not the coaching staff put in enough work to game plan for the Panthers ahead of the Bruins series.
I think they did. I think the criticism would be that they were a little too slow making adjustments. Like I think the game plan going in was solid. I mean, they went up 3-1. They were winning games without Bergeron and Krejci. They had a clear special teams advantage really for most of the series until maybe the last couple of games where it kind of evened out. So it seemed like they sort of had things fairly well buttoned up, but then, I do think that they were a little slow to simplify their breakouts. That was something that probably should have happened earlier when they're having some troubles with that, with Florida's forecheck. Montgomery really never made like a clear adjustment to dealing with the Bennett and Kachuk line. They basically did shut down the Barkov line almost pretty much the entire series, but kind of never had an answer for Bennett and Kachuk. And I think that's a fair criticism is, changing things quicker. And then I thought, Florida's power play finally started to get some better looks as the series went on, which to an extent I think was a little bit inevitable because Florida's power play has too much talent to have gone over against, any penalty kill for the whole series. But once they did start generating more, I thought the Bruins were a little slow to react in terms of adjusting their penalty kill and neutralizing some of the things that the Panthers were doing. So to me, it's not that they didn't have a good game plan from the get-go. It's that the in-series adjustments as it went on were insufficient.
I would say it was less about, and I agree with a lot of what Scott said. I mean, everything, honestly, but I would say it was more about it wasn't a lack of adjusting for the opponent. It was the Bruins just didn't understand for whatever reason that their own team in that series. And I think you saw it with Toronto too. There was just there were some key additions for Boston. I know Toronto had like 6 players added at the deadline and Boston had 3. But it was really more than that, because then when Taylor Hall came back and Nick Foligno, it was kind of like you're adding 5 guys. It was totally different. And I just feel like the Bruins just didn't know exactly what they wanted their team to look like from a personnel standpoint with different lines and whatnot. And I think that's honestly kind of what ended up biting them in the ass more than anything else. I do think that they were prepared for Florida. The adjustments weren't made like Scott mentioned, but it wasn't because of a lack of pre-scouting, I don't think. I just think the Bruins just kind of didn't know what they wanted to be in that series from their personnel standpoint.
Yeah, and I think the way that the comment was in the conversation that was being had in the comment section was kind of about the pressure, the amount of pressure that Florida was able to put on the Bruins, and were they prepared for that? Did they have a game plan that could counter that kind of physical pressure that the Panthers put on?
Yeah, and that's where I think like adjusting the breakout was a little too slow, where, I think the Bruins going in probably thought, hey, our defense and breakout game has held up really well against every forecheck all year. We're not going to change anything to start, which is understandable. But then as they started to have some issues, as their breakouts weren't clean, I thought, I mean, you watch Florida play and like they're playing their own zone, and their breakouts is like against the Bruins and against the Leafs. It's like the most simple hockey you can possibly play. It's a lot of just flipping pucks out, just getting into the neutral zone and then battling for it. And it's like, it's ugly. And like, that's not really ideally how you want to play. You want to have more controlled exits with possession. But if you're under pressure and that's not happening cleanly, then I think you have to be willing to do what Florida has done, which is just get it out. Like, just bank it off the glass, just flip it out into the neutral zone and try to go get it. And I thought the Bruins were really too hesitant. Like, we're just too hesitant to do that. Like, almost, I don't know if it's like a pride thing or it's like, no, like we break out with possession. That's what we do. That's what we're going to do. And I just think they stuck with it too long and had too many breakouts where they didn't break out with possession because they turned it over instead. So, sometimes you have to simplify, even if you think you should be able to do better and should be able to play, your usual game. If it's not happening, you got to adjust. I thought they were too slow to do that.
I mean, I also felt like they were too slow to do that last year too with Carolina, but that was under Bruce Cassidy. So it's part of it for me is I don't is it part of just the DNA of some of these players as a group? I don't know because Montgomery and Cassidy have far different. I shouldn't say far different, but they're different, especially defensively. Bruce is more locked down, and the Bruins struggled against Carolina's forecheck. They struggled against the Islanders' forecheck the year before. They've struggled against St. Louis's forecheck in 19. So the Bruins struggling against the forecheck and not being able to make those adjustments quick enough is this year. Yes, you can look at Jim Montgomery and say he's the man running the ship, but it happened in years past under a defensive-minded coach as well, more defensive-minded coach than Montgomery. So what you were just talking about, Scott, I agree with, but it makes me question why is it happening under multiple different coaching regimes with and some with more of a defensive mind. So I just don't know. It might be is it the personnel? Is it the players themselves? I don't know.
Guys, I didn't mean to do that.
We're just taking over.
I will switch to another question that I was just flipping through my notes too to like prepare for this one, but I think there might be an obvious answer, and then I want to try to give a less obvious answer to this one, which is what specific play was the single biggest mistake by the Bruins or a Bruin in round one?
So for me, the single biggest mistake was Allmark's turnover in overtime. Kind of that might be what you're thinking with the obvious one. But yeah, just, like still hard to figure out what exactly was going on there. Like obviously miscommunication, but for Allmark to put that puck where he did, like right into the closest Panther, it was just like, how do you make that play in that situation? So that, and obviously because it leads to such a big goal, like you have a chance to eliminate them in 5 games, make that turnover, you literally just give away a game to make it a 3-2 series, and then Florida never loses momentum after that, really. So that stands out to me.
Yeah, I believe that's probably the obvious answer for everybody. Scott's just the one who had to mention it. I would say aside from that one, I would point to Hampus Lindholm clearing the puck over the glass by about 20 feet after they had a 5-4 lead in the third period of Game 6, and you have a chance to close out that series then. And he just, with no pressure on him, just clears the puck over the glass, and then I think it was Matthew Tkachuk ties the game 5-5, and then next thing you know, it's 6-5 and game over. So it's a more subtle mistake. I don't think it's one that jumps to anybody's mind necessarily. It didn't even jump to my mind, but when Scott was answering it, I had to just start playing back the series in my mind. And while there were a lot of turnovers by the Bruins in that series, and a handful of them resulted in Florida goals, a lot of those the Bruins were able to come back and at least tie the game after that, or maybe even win the game. But that Lindholm one stands out to me because they weren't able to recover from that. Once they gave away the lead, Florida won the game 6-5, and now it's 3-3, and you go back to Boston for 7. So I guess that one, aside from the Allmark one, that one jumps out in my mind.
Yeah, and so the Allmark one is, I think, the most obvious because I feel like when it happened, it was like, oh no, that's obviously, not only is that such a glaring, horrible mistake, it's embarrassing. I feel like it also almost changed the momentum of the series, because if you really think about it, the Bruins had the momentum at that point. You're like, oh no, well, they just had a chance to end the series in Game 5. They didn't do it. Does it mess with Allmark's psyche? Does it mess with some of the ways they want to handle goaltending? I think that it had like a ripple effect on the whole series, the way that individual play, that bang, bang, 1-2 seconds of a lapse and a mistake was definitely affected the series, not just in the fact that it was extended, but in just a lot of other ways as well. And even at the time, I feel like I thought, oh wow, that was a bad one, but there's still 2 games left for the Bruins to win. And those 2 games proved to be, just as hard fought. And it wasn't like you were going to skate past those. But when your team is the best team in NHL history and you have a 3-1 series lead, you're thinking, all right, that was a really bad mistake, but still got 2 games to deal with this. And then that's just really was a huge turning point in the series, was that one turnover. But to also bring a less obvious one, I would also go back to game 5, because any way they could have won game 5 was the critical game, really. So I think back to the very first period of game 5, when Bertuzzi made that horrible turnover, and Anthony Duclair scored, and the Bruins went down 1-0. That was early in the game. Once again, that game goes to overtime. So if you don't make that mistake, probably a regulation win for the Bruins. Obviously, who knows how the game plays out after that. Things get played differently, obviously. But if Bertuzzi doesn't make that mistake, the Bruins don't put themselves in a hole early. And I think that game doesn't go to overtime, probably a regulation win, and the Bruins are on to the next round.
Yeah, and one other ripple effect from that Ullmark mistake, and we touched on it after game 6, and we never really got an answer, but was that miscommunication? Did they blame Grzelcyk for part of that, for him not yelling out more or telling Ullmark where to go with it? And is that part of the reason he came out of the lineup for game 6, which turned out to be a mistake because Forbort and Clifton really struggled together in game 6? So yeah, just another ripple effect off of that.
And it also, you guys kind of alluded to it as well, but a lot of the reason the momentum changed after that play is also because, yes, tangibly they lost the game and now it's a 3-2 series lead and you're going back to Florida. But a lot of the narrative going into that series from the hockey world in general was, are the Bruins going to find a way to choke this series away? The most points in league history in a season, most wins, all that stuff. And that play in particular, it's not like they just lost the game in overtime. They lost it in a way, they shot themselves in the foot. And and so there was an aura about that play. It's okay, this team is going to find ways to lose now. And they choked that game away. And now that narrative starts to build and pick up steam for the rest of the series. And that's another reason why the way that they lost that game was just pretty damning for them, and they couldn't recover, obviously.
Yeah. Any other ones you can think of, or can I move on to the second part of this?
No, go on to the second part. So
the second part is, what was the single biggest missed opportunity? And I'm talking about an individual play. So is there a play in your mind that you can recall that was the single biggest missed opportunity for the Bruins to either put the series away or extend a lead at a point where, it would have put the game out of reach, things like that?
Brian, do you want to take the obvious one this time, or want me to go first again?
Yeah, I was going to say, oh God, that's funny. Well, what Scott's alluding to is the opportunity for Brad Marchand to end the series literally on a last-second breakaway, end of regulation, game 5. And of course, Bobrovsky makes a save. You go to overtime, you lose the game. That Ullmark mistake doesn't happen if Marchand buries that. And for all the talk about how gritty Florida is and how much they just outmanned Boston in the series, and let's be honest, for a lot of the series they did, but it's all for naught if the Bruins find a way to steal a series in 5 games after not playing their best hockey. And that's exactly what would have happened had Marchand found the back of the net there. So certainly that's the most obvious missed opportunity, and I kind of dragged it on for a little bit longer so you guys could think of a less obvious one.
Well, I want to push back on that, though, because I said this at the time and I still believe this. There was, if he had a few more seconds, I think then I would call that the single biggest missed opportunity. But he had no time to make a move. He wasn't able to really have his best chance at a breakaway because I wasn't even sure if he was going to get that shot off in time. He was coming up to the crease. He was coming up to his shooting position with pretty much no time left on the clock. And obviously, when you have that little time, you're in your head, you're not set up for success on a breakaway. If you're wondering, do I even have time to make a move or two? I think that if, say, that happened with 5 seconds left, that he got the shot off with 5 seconds left, that'd be different. But it was a second or less that he got the shot off in. And I just think that Marchand obviously has brought that up as something that's going to haunt him, but that seems like, of course, would have been great. Would have been a great way to end the series. Everything, the ceiling would have caved in on the Garden, but I don't see that as the single biggest mistake because of the timing of it.
Well, real quick though, I just want to clarify. So this question is missed opportunity, right? Not mistake.
Oh yeah, sorry, missed opportunity. So I don't see that as a missed opportunity. The biggest missed opportunity.
I mean,
it is a missed opportunity.
He definitely didn't have the luxury of a penalty shot where you have all the time in the world or a shootout shot. But I will say, and if he had more time and he knew that, maybe he would have done something different. All that said, though, he still got a really hard snapshot off that he scores on most of the time. So it wasn't a blunder by him. It was a phenomenal save by Bobrovsky. It's a missed opportunity in my mind.
Yeah, and it's not like you have to like shoot from just inside the blue line. Like he still got a good shot off and had enough time. Like, yeah, he couldn't slow down and do, a dipsy do, but like he got into the slot and got a really good look. And there was even like a rebound before the buzzer actually sounded that I forget who the Panthers defenseman was, but it like ricocheted off him, and it was like, imagine if Bobrovsky makes a save and then it goes off the defenseman and in. There probably wasn't enough time for that to happen, but like the rebound did pop out too before the buzzer sounded. The other one for me, so I guess so. I approached this question like similar to Brian as in terms of not necessarily like a bad play or like someone screwing something up, but just exactly like missed opportunity as like you look at and you're like, man, if that's just like a little more this way. But game 7 in overtime, Pastrnak had a couple great chances, and one of them he beats Bobrovsky over the right arm, and it hits the shaft of Bobrovsky's stick and goes wide. Like, I don't, Pastrnak couldn't have really done anything different. It was a good shot. He had him beat. But so maybe, less like missed opportunity in terms of like Pastrnak missing it, but just in terms of like a game of inches type thing, just the pure. I think like goalies will try to tell you that, hey, the top of our stick is part of our equipment. Like we have control over that. But in my mind, like those saves are very lucky when you get those off the top part of the stick, and Bobrovsky got one. So, maybe it's good positioning and he knew it was there or whatever, but I think that's just like sheer luck where Pastrnak had him beat and it's in the top corner if it doesn't hit Bobrovsky's stick.
I want to go to the last 5 minutes of regulation in game 7 because I think there were a lot of missed opportunities in that 5-minute span. So with 4:12 left, Orlov hit the pipe. That would have probably sealed the win, would have been a 2-goal lead. With about 2 minutes left, Florida pulls a goalie. You have an empty net situation. If you can just somehow find a way to put one into the empty net, series is over. Game 7 doesn't go to overtime. You don't lose. You're not dealing with a 59-second left Montour goal in regulation, and you're not forced into overtime. You're able to finish it in regulation if a few of these things happen differently for you, or you handle these last 5 minutes of regulation differently in game 7. So there was a game of inches in those last 5 minutes as well. I remember just some close chances and them at times playing too defensively once they had that 1-goal lead. But that Orlov shot off the pipe was one that I recall and one that he brought up in the exit interviews. And just if they had just been able to find a way to get that like an empty net goal, or even to just make an extra clear like out of the zone, we're talking about killing off the 6-on-5 with the extra attacker, and we're not talking about overtime, and we're not talking about what happened in the Bruins. How did they find a way to blow a 3-1 series lead?
Yeah, I feel like that extra attacker situation, like it's kind of been overlooked, and like those situations are always kind of chaotic, but yeah, just their total inability to get the puck back and even get clears. It was, again, it's tough, right? You're facing a team literally fighting for its life, like doing everything it can. But Yeah, this Bruins team and like how good they've been defensively all year, you expect a clear at some point there, and just never happened. Like they really just never even had the chance. Honestly, they're just sort of hanging on for dear life, and it's not what you want to be doing in that situation. You want to be a little bit more in control, and I think Florida just came at them too fast, and they really weren't able to handle it.
Yeah, the Orlov hitting the post, I forgot all about that one. That was definitely would have ended things right then and there, most likely. And forgive me if you guys mentioned this, but didn't they have a power play in the third period too after taking the lead? Did you guys mention that?
We didn't mention it, but yeah,
I mean that's a missed opportunity. But yeah, it's just the second Pasternak gave them the lead in the third period, they just, for the most part, they played on their heels, and they played to preserve the lead as opposed to playing for the win, right? Or what's the saying? You played not to lose as opposed to playing to win. So that was pretty apparent, and you get what you deserve in that situation.
All right, so I think we answered that one. Kind of want to go. Actually, we can save this one for our other recording because we want to get a little bit more into. Do you want to get into this now or not? Going around the NHL a little bit. What other teams choked so far through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs?
We might as well, because I think this one's kind of quick, honestly.
Okay.
Well, at least for me. Maybe you guys have other ideas. But yeah, so what other teams choked? I mean, Bruins are clearly the biggest by far. They were the only ones who have blown a 3-1 lead so far. I think you could maybe say the Rangers, who are up 2-0 on the Devils, winning 2 on the road, and then end up losing that series. That's a pretty tough look, especially with everything they did at the deadline as well. They probably feel like that's pretty close to a choke. That was really the only other one that stood out. Like there hasn't really been a lot. I mean, you could maybe say Colorado. I think they were up like 2-1 in that series, maybe. But as it turned out, like Seattle was a good team all year. They limped a little bit down the stretch, but I don't know. Colorado was a little banged up. They clearly weren't the team that they were last year. So maybe you could say them, defending Cup champs going out in the first round. But that Seattle team, that ends up taking Dallas to Game 7 and misses out and getting to the conference finals by 1 goal. So I don't really view that as a choke. Maple Leafs, like they're just overmatched. Like I don't know if that's a choke so much as a series that they were basically never even in, honestly. Like Florida just controlled that series right from the start. So I don't really think you can call that a choke.
Yeah, it's tough. The Rangers, you want to call it potentially a choke, but at the end of the day, they lost the series to a team that they were higher than them in the standings. So they played their matchup against a really solid New Jersey team. The Oilers, you want to sit there and say they choked another possibility away with McDavid and Draisaitl, but they lost in 6 games to the number 1 seed in the West. And Vegas is a better all-around team. You take away McDavid and Draisaitl, and I mean Edmonton's they're okay, but they're not great. Colorado, you mentioned Seattle, like they play hard. You saw them play here in Boston, and was it Boston's best night? No, but it was a good indication of how Seattle can play. And Tampa Bay, they didn't choke against Toronto. They played a lot of hockey. That was bound to happen. Toronto, look, when Florida beats Boston, you can't call them losing to Florida a choke. So in my opinion, only one team really choked this year, and it was Boston.
Okay, and then so I guess maybe more you would say would be an upset for Toronto than a choke.
Yeah. That's yes, but that's even then it's tough because Florida they just did what they did to Boston. So when Toronto wins their first round since 2004, I guess you could call it an upset based on the standings, but recent memory, Florida beating them really wouldn't be an upset in most people's eyes.
Yeah, I think falling behind 3-0 was an upset. Like I at least expected that to be a competitive series, and to lose the first 2 at home and then go down 3-0. It's like that I didn't see coming. The Leafs should have been more competitive than that. I know the Panthers have been rolling and they had all the momentum in the world and all that, but like I do think there's still an awful lot of finger pointing going on in Toronto, and deservedly so. Like lots of questions for them to answer. And saw like Kyle Dubas, their general manager, hasn't fully committed to next season yet. He's like going to take some time. Might not even be his decision anyways. Are they going to split up their quote unquote core four? Like, does someone get traded there? William Nylander would probably be the most likely one. Like, it's, I think when you go out like as weakly as they did, gentleman's sweep style, like there's a lot of questions, but it wasn't really a choke. It was probably just, I don't know, an underachievement and disappointment, just a total letdown after, finally winning a round.
All right. So we've actually only gone through a few of these and we've already gone quite a while. So the next two questions are to do with coaching. A lot of the comments we got after Game 7 are related to coaching. We kind of got to one earlier as well. So this comment was, Montgomery should be fired for being a scared coach. Goalie hurt, changing up the lineup over and over again. The question was, is it an overreaction to already be saying Montgomery is not the right guy to lead the Bruins to a Stanley Cup?
Yeah, I think it is an overreaction. Like he obviously didn't have a good series. That we've covered that on past podcasts. Everything we thought he got wrong, everything that's fair to question him about, and a lot of it absolutely is fair. Like there's plenty to criticize Jim Montgomery for in this series. He was pretty hard on himself in his exit interview and end of season press conference. But I would point out that like this is someone whose track record over the course of his career is really good. He won in the USHL right away, won a championship, got to 2 Frozen Fours at Denver, wins a national championship. His one full season in Dallas gets him to the second round of the playoffs. Big improvement over the year before. They were off to a good start a second year before he obviously got fired. St. Louis improved under him. After they had taken like a bit of a disappointing step back after the Stanley Cup year. So, and then obviously what he did in the regular season this year, that shouldn't be ignored. Like he had this team playing really good hockey and pushed a lot of right buttons, and then it all crashed and burned in the playoffs. So like, yes, some criticism is fair, but the idea that like he's in over his head or he can't win or he's not the right guy to lead them going forward. I think that's one where like I get the emotional, passionate response to what you just saw, but like take a deep breath for like a couple months this summer and like regroup a little, because I think that's probably a bit unfair. I think Jim Montgomery is a really good coach who made some mistakes.
I also think that would be an overreaction. I think obviously you have to give the guy an opportunity to show that he's learned, right? I mean, back in 2009, you could say the Bruins lost to a less talented Carolina team with Claude Julien behind the bench, and then the following year they blow a 3-0 series lead against Philadelphia. So if people were rash about Claude Julien not coming back in 2011, maybe you don't win the Stanley Cup. And by the way, they're 1 goal away from losing Game 7 in round 1 to Montreal, and maybe he would have been fired after that. But you got to give a guy an opportunity to learn. What I didn't like about Montgomery is I just think he needs to not be such a good cop. And you guys have heard me say this before, but I hated the comments after Game 6. I don't even care if he was trying to placate to the media, but to lose a closeout game 6-5 on the road after having 2 leads in the third period, and to come out into the at the podium and say, you know what a great hockey game, and just like smiling. It's like, no, buddy, that's not what this team needs right now. So I'm not saying that's what he was saying to his team behind closed doors, but I just think there needs to be a little bit less of a buddy approach with the players, and just, you can be that guy, but I just think there is some adjustments he needs to make. Some not over complicating his lineup. Just go with your gut. Go with what's gotten you to where you've been. Don't overthink things. Don't be such a psychiatrist for the players and massage their shoulders all the time. So there's a couple of changes I think he can make going forward that would benefit him and the team. But no, I don't think they should get rid of him because of this spring.
It's very obviously an overreaction to say to fire the head coach of a team that has the new record for wins in the NHL after his first year. It's, the sample size of playoffs was 7 games. And it was not the result that he should have gotten with his team. And it's fair to criticize his handling of a lot of different parts of the series and how he had a roster this good and couldn't find a way to make it out of the first round. But I guess in order just to push this a little bit into, less of a black and white kind of question, I think it made a lot of people think, is he the guy? Does he have what it takes to say in the next 5 years? Is he the right style of coach? Does he have what it takes to get whatever the Bruins have, whatever the roster the Bruins may have now going forward, which, by the way, this was the best team he was going to have. So now if he's going to lead the team to a Stanley Cup, it's going to be with fewer pieces. Maybe that'll help him simplify it. But I guess maybe to push it a little further, does he have what it takes to, in the next 5 years, lead the Bruins to a Stanley Cup? Obviously, they're not going to ditch him yet, but to go a little further.
So I don't know about a Stanley Cup, because that's going to depend on how this retool goes and what the roster looks like over the next few years. But one thing I will be really interested in with Montgomery is, when they hired him, like, one of the things Cam Neely and Don Sweeney talked about as, part of what they liked about him is they felt like, he works well with younger players and he'll help develop them more. And, I guess we probably saw a little bit of that this year. Trent Frederick definitely took a step forward. He's on the younger side. He's not a rookie, obviously. Jake DeBrusk is still young-ish, and he took a step forward. Jacob Lauko looked good when he got opportunity. So, like, you saw a little bit of that, but for the most part, this was a very veteran-heavy roster. So he didn't have like a ton of opportunities to really develop younger players. I guess maybe you could say like Jacob Zaboral was, possibly a disappointment in that respect. He just didn't use him. He just didn't play. Like, he was on the roster all year, but he didn't really get an opportunity. So maybe you could say he didn't really develop him, or, how do you develop a guy if he's not going to play? So, but going forward, like, we're going to have to see that because they're going to have to get younger. They can't, we've covered it. Like, they can't afford to keep everyone. So there's going to be turnover. And, I'd say, especially like towards the bottom of the roster, you're going to have to give some guys from Providence a chance. So how he does with that, I think, will be interesting. That's part of the reason they told us that's part of the reason why they hired him. And he's obviously done that. He's worked in the USHL. He's worked in college. Like, he has experience developing younger players. When he was at Denver, he sent some guys to the NHL, Danton Heinen among them, coming to the Bruins. So I think, that'll be interesting. And I think that's where he can show, some real chops besides just, can he win a cup, which was obviously the goal this year. I think other goals surface if there's a bit of a retool, and he'll be tested in different ways.
Nope, I would agree with that. Bridget, I think we're probably good to move on to the next question if we wanted to finish up here.
Yeah, sorry. Someone just started cutting their lawn next to me, so I had my mic muted. I hope you can't hear it. This is probably what we're going to end with because one last coaching question. So Montgomery is up for the Jack Adams, and he's the favorite to win it. But is he really the best coach in the NHL this season?
I mean, this is a cop-out answer, but I kind of feel like the best coach in the NHL is the one who hoists the Stanley Cup at the end of the season.
Right.
I think that's when the most adjustments come into play. I think that's when you're game planning against 4 teams for 2 months for 7-game series. I think that's when you earn that title. Regular season awards are what they are, but I think when the biggest prize in the industry is won in June. The regular season award doesn't really tell me who the best coach is. Now, obviously, the best team has a play in that, but I think the guy who wins the cup is probably the best coach in the league at the end of that year.
Yeah, and I think best coach is also extremely dependent on situations. Like I don't really think that like there's anyone in the NHL right now who's like the Bill Belichick or Phil Jackson has just like this long track record of winning a ton of championships, or Scotty Bowman, to use an NHL example. Like that coach isn't in the league right now. So, you look around and it's like, all right, like look at the Western Conference Finals. It's Bruce Cassidy against Pete DeBoer, both in their first years with new teams. Two guys who are undeniably great coaches who've had success, have won a lot of games wherever they've been. But, and we touched on the Cassidy thing on the last podcast. Like, I think he had run his course in Boston. Like, I think his voice had grown stale, and it wasn't the right situation for him anymore. So would he, is Bruce Cassidy a better coach now in Vegas than he was in Boston? I'm sure he learned and grew, like, no question. I think coaches learn and try to get better every year. But it's just a better situation because, like, Vegas was a team that needed his voice, where his voice was going to make an impact and have an effect on those players. Whereas in Boston, if his voice is losing that effect and guys are tuning it out or don't like the way he's delivering messages anymore, like, well, then is he really the best coach for Boston? Like, not like if guys aren't responding, then whether the coach is doing what he's supposed to do or not, then like that's just not a great situation to have. It was the same, Pete DeBoer got fired in Vegas. Like, he had been a great coach there, but they obviously want to change. They felt like he wasn't the right guy anymore. So, who's the best coach in the league? It's like Mike Sullivan has the rings. He has 3 of them, but Pittsburgh missed the playoffs this year. So, like, is Mike Sullivan not a good coach anymore? Like, no, of course he is, but he couldn't save that team this year. Rod Brendamore, obviously highly regarded as a great coach. Hasn't made it to a cup final yet, has been in Carolina for a while now, has had some playoff disappointments on his resume. So it's all dependent on the situation. And I guess, I would say, like, is Jim Montgomery the best coach in the league? Probably not, but like, he's up there. I mean, he's a good coach. Like, I don't question that.
All right, so the finalists this year are Jim Montgomery, Lindy Ruff, and Dave Haxtell, just in case people didn't know who the other coaches are that are up for the award. Once again, I'm sorry, somebody just started, I don't know if you can hear it, like weed whacking.
I can't really hear it, so.
Okay, well, that was our last question anyway for today. We're going to have another mailbag next week as well, and some of the questions we have that we didn't get to that we'll get to then were about Bergeron's injury. A lot of people are asking about, will he need surgery, and just different things about a few of the Bruins injuries, future of the Bruins, and potential trades were some of the questions we did not get to that we can get to in our next mailbag segment, and whatever else anyone wants to send in.
By the way, just to wrap up the Jack Adams discussion, Montgomery is going to win, though, because when you break all those regular season records, it's a regular season award. So playoffs have no impact. All the votes were already done before the playoffs started. So he will win.
Yes.
Yeah, but the question was it was beyond the award, so we tried to give a little more objectively. He's going to win. Yes. Yeah. Do we really think he is? I think Scott. I think he put it pretty accurately. He's probably not, right? But he definitely, well, certainly not playoff coach at this point. But if we're talking regular season coaches, he's clearly among, he's up there. He's a top tier coach in the regular season. Hopefully that translates to the postseason next year. So, Bridget and Scott, unless you have anything else to go over in this episode, I think we'll probably wrap it up. Yeah. Fingers on the dial.
All good.
All right. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you soon.